Hello, friends. Happy Sunday. Well, that's what today is. My name is Mary, and I'm going to be talking about a really fun topic, UFOs and UAPs. Now, I'm also maybe going to throw in some information about giants. So this will be a really interesting time if you're into UFOs and UAPs. To start off with, I'm going to be talking about Pleiadians today in specifics, although what I'm going to say is going to apply to other UFOs as well. Many, I'm sure of you, have seen UFOs for yourself. Nowadays, there's a possibility that some items that are flying around could actually be advanced drones from our military. We are about 70 years behind what the actual level of technology has reached, because they don't share that with the public. But that being said, UFOs are real. I know that they are, and UAPs. And there have been filmings from Las Vegas of aliens in people's backyards. There's also been the ones that showed up in Florida in a mall. So many of you are probably familiar with those. Today I'm going to be talking specifically what I know about Pleiadians, because there was a man, Billy Meier, who is from Switzerland. Back in the 20s, he was born, and he lived to be, I don't know how old, but he lived to be like into the mid-60s, 1960s, or, maybe late 1960s. And he, during that whole time, had visitations from Pleiadians who talked to him. They took turns. If you know about Pleiadians, they're tall, they're fair-looking, look humanoid, blonde or whitish hair, and they spent considerable time. They always had one person who was kind of appointed to share with Billy Meier, and that was his name in Switzerland. And they started appearing to him in the mountains, and they showed him their craft. They let him photograph, they let him video. He had an extensive time with them. And then later on, he met this man, Michael Horn. And Michael was just, he believed him because he had lots of proof, and he was enamored with the whole Pleiadian thing. And so he put up a website for Billy Meier that's still out there, and he still talks about him. He was younger, so, he's still with us, and he's an older gentleman now. But his name is Michael Horn, and the website is theyflyblog.com. Theyflyblog.com. So what are the things that we know about the Pleiadians because of Billy Meier and Michael Horn? We do know that that they're verified to be real sightings, and because the photographs and the videos were reviewed, later on it was videos, of course. In the beginning, there were no video machines because Billy Meier was young. But as time went on, he did get video of them as well. The craft that he had filmed was a saucer. It had shapes around it. It was surrounded like a third of the way down with these metallic balls. They would pick up the imagery from around them as they reflected back. So it's very wild, but you could see it on theyflyblog.com. They also told him a lot of things. They shared things that would happen. For instance, they talked about JFK and his murder before it happened, and they had all the details and everything, which is fascinating. They also said there would be earthquakes and volcanoes that would completely obliterate Vatican City. So there we have that. That hasn't come about, and I hope it doesn't. So anyway, that was something that they said. They also said that there was something about Jupiter, and they gave some science behind one of the revolving moons. And that science was later discovered, like, 5-10 years after they had made these statements. And so all the information is on the website. You'll find it very interesting if you want to go peruse it. They said that they were here for peace, that they had the best intentions for mankind. They promoted meditation, like Buddhism. They believe in this book of Om they said they had from their planet, and Om from Buddhism is probably what they're thinking. And they believe in reincarnation. So they shared these things with Billy Meier, and Billy Meier shared them with Michael Horn. So they say a lot about our history. So if you're on the website, it's broken out between ancient history and more current history, current events, and prophecy. So there's 2 different sections there that you can go through and figure out what they shared. Michael Horn, of course, he realizes these things were real, but he bought into all of their stories, hook, line, and sinker. So he's been meditating and everything, and he does say it's helped him over the years. So I'm going to go over some of the ancient history that they share on the site, and that Billy Meier shared, and Michael Horn has also repeated some of these things on the show Redacted. If you've ever watched that, it's a very good show, and these Clayton Morris and his wife Natalie do a fantastic job of sharing information that you will not get on mainstream media. Okay, so they said that the long skulls ruled in the past, as seen on Egyptian pyramids, carvings. Ashkenatyn and his wife Nefertiti from 1345 BC. And also they talk about ancient Mayan artifacts, and they say that the DNA is different for these special Egyptians and special deities that they claim that were Mayan, in the Mayan area in Central and South America. So they said that the pyramids were built by them, both pyramids in Egypt and pyramids around where the Mayans were. In the Egyptian one, there are images of animals with human heads. We call this transhumanism. We know that in the past, these beings did want to combine DNA, so animal DNA with human DNA. So there's images of, cat heads with human bodies, etc., things like that. Also serpent type creatures that had human bodies and had heads like a bird with a bird beak. So you've probably seen that before in pictures from the tombs. They said that ancient Americans in that area of Central and South America worshipped a feathered serpent being or deities, and flying serpents as their gods. So they mention Quetzalcoatl, and they claim that they're extraterrestrial. They came from space or other planets, and Tukulkan. But they do quote the Bible on this. They say, and the Lord sent fiery serpents, has seraphim, among the people, and they bit the people, and much people of Israel died. So that's what they say. It's on the site. And they also say ancient aliens are us. They say that we were refugees from another star system. They also said that we colonized Mars, so we were the Martians. We were genetically engineered refugees from a Sirian star system who would later come to Earth. Then they have a list that they say of Sumerian kings, and they say this king list begins after kingship had descended from heaven. So they're saying that Eridu and Alulim and Alulgar, that 8 of kings reigned in 241,200 years ago. And then that the huge flood came. They mention Gilgamesh and Eridu, which is all in the story of Gilgamesh. Eridu, the center of kingship after the earth foreigners arrived on earth, meaning us, and descended from heaven. And so in the Epic of Gilgamesh, they cite that heavily, and by the Pleiadians, they're citing it. Utu was tall in nature. He was a giant. And I want to say that everything that they mention is sort of backed up by archaeologists who have found artifacts of these things. So it's not a huge stretch to know that there were giants, which is also in the Bible. So they proceed to talk about prophets, and they include Zoroaster, they include all the prophets, the Old Testament prophets, they include Buddha, they include Vishnu, they include a lot. Who they leave out is Jesus, which we'll get to that. That's interesting. So they said that there was a war this many 100,000, 200,000 years ago. There was a war and turmoil which devastated the earth and forced our ancestors to flee. And it was caused by an Jewish, J-S-C-H-W-I-S-C-H, awfully close to Jewish, I would say, because it sounds the same. Someone who should have been wiser. The name of the man god was Jesus, J-E-S-A-S. Now, here's the thing. He said that, or the Pleiadians said that this man god, Jesus, killed millions and that they had to escape back out to the stars for a while, and that many were totally annihilated. And then he said 133,000 years, then there was Atlantis after that. Well, I'm going to talk about this now as far as a timeline. Oh, and they also mentioned their book of the truth, which is called Om. Om. Okay, so here's the thing. The timeline is completely off, and I'll discuss why that's true. Also, God is not going to let them malign the name of his son. Nobody gets to do that. Not fallen angels, not Nephilim, Rephaim, none of them. So instead of calling him Jesus, they have to change one letter to A, Jesus instead of Jesus. Why is he left out of a prophetic long list? You have to ask yourself, if these things are really alien and came from Pleiades, why would they give one iota of care about what our religious beliefs and systems are here and leave out the one that has Jesus? Okay? So I'm going to go more into that because they're real. They're just not who you think they are necessarily. So they also quote Plato. They talk about Poseidon transformed the city of Atlantis, and he married Cleotis, and they came from the stars. Actually, they're fallen angels from heaven, but they came and they procreated here, and they had created Zeus and Apollo and Hercules and Diana, etc. Now, what happened on Atlantis is that, and we're going to go into time frame because it's not 200,000 years ago, but Atlantis, I believe, was a true little mini continent off of Africa. And when they were there, they came down here. All of the fallen angels came here. They had powers. They had different abilities. They were super beings because they're angelic. And they still had those powers that we don't have when they first came down here. And why they all landed, or because of Akhenaten and all of that, that's them as well. They socked it in right around where Israel's going to be because they know that's God's land. And they're going to fight them later on, which happens in the Bible extensively in the Old Testament, fighting against the Israelis. So 12 tribes of Israel. So in the meantime, when Atlantis was there and Poseidon and Cleotis and all of them, they found, and I don't know what this mineral is. It's a mineral that only existed in Atlantis. I can't remember the name of it. Was underneath this island, basically a big, huge island. They were mining and mining and mining and mining. And they mined so much that eventually the water sucked in and brought the whole thing down, and Atlantis had a huge collapse and it was gone. Okay, so in the time frame of thing, because we're talking about fallen angels, it was not 200,000 years ago. There was Adam. There was then the fallen angels, which is in the Old Testament, and they made it and created giants that were Rephaim and Nephilim. Nephilim were first and then Rephaim. Okay, so it isn't 200,000 years ago. God has designed in the Bible that there's a 7,000 year time frame, and I'm going to explain that now. God said that a day to him is 1,000 years and 1,000 years as a day. He set up each week to represent how much man is going to have. So in that day for 1,000 years, it's 7,000 years. How do I know? When Jesus changed water into wine, he used these big jugs, and there were 6 of them. The water into wine is the time period of mankind when they can be saved from sin. Turning us from water into wine is when we go from being sinners to followers of the real Christ, which is actually in every single book of the Bible. We know also that God always confirms his word in other places in the book. So if you go back to Genesis, he says, I will not always strive with mankind. His years will be 120. Well, back then they were living 800, 900 years. What did he mean? If you take that 120 times the perfect jubilee of 50, you get 6,000 years. Again, mankind is meant for a 6,000 year period when we got to rule. Then there's 1,000 years left for when Jesus is ruling in the millennium. That's a 7,000 year time frame. I know people say, oh, but the dinosaurs. So it was, things were way back 100,000 years, 200,000 years, a million years. No, and here's why. There is no science that verifies that carbon dating was correct. And in fact, it's been debunked. There are scientists that studied some fungus from the Arctic. And here's the thing. The equipment that they use in the carbon dating and everything says, okay, this is, 200,000 years old. But no, it's shown to be false because the way that the spores work with the fungus, that stuff is not any older than a few thousand years. It's not 200,000, a million. So if you go back for another proof, it's the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were wiped out during the flood. You can watch that in a movie called The Ark and the Darkness. In The Ark and the Darkness, there are scientists that were looking at, well, there's so much in there, you'll have to watch it. I really tell you, watch it. So what happened was the water from the flood was, it says, up above all the mountains. Well, yeah, everything was in huge turmoil. Even the Native Americans have stories of the Great Flood, etc. And the Great Flood was around 3,000 something or so. I'll come back to that because it's in my notes here somewhere. But anyway, it's a 7,000 year time frame of the whole thing. And when the dinosaurs were in the water and turmoil and they ended up everywhere, so did some of the other animals. There was no room for dinosaurs on the ark. God was selective about what he wanted to survive after that point. So the dinosaurs became extinct because of the flood. And what they found is some of the animals in that same time frame that were normal animals were there next to, from the devastation, next to giant dinosaurs, Stegosaurus or whatever. Now, a further proof is that they've found sinew in between dinosaur bones, and where you would have flexing and stuff like that shouldn't be there. The sinew shouldn't be there, any kind of muscle or anything. If it's 100,000 years old, a million years old, there would only be bones left. That's it. So it verifies that they are not 20,000 years old, they're not 50, they're not 100, and they're not a million. They're within that 6,000 year time frame. So so here's kind of a timeline. Adam, year 0, when God created Adam or whatever. Then you had, here it is, the flood, which was 2348 BC. Then you have Christ at the year 4000. Now the cool thing about that is nobody knew what year it was till recently, because it says in the Bible, especially in Daniel, that there would be an unsealing of things at the end. And this is unsealing of information, of knowledge about the end times. So why do we know now? Many of us, like me, we're investigating, we're trying to track back, we're saying, okay, you know, Adam lived this many years, and then it says, and he begot so-and-so, and he lived this many years, and we're trying to use that to get somewhere. But eventually, prior to King Saul, it all falls apart, and you can't follow it. But a smart man called, I think it's Rev Torah. Anyway, he discovered that if you took the information from all the aging of so-and-so begot so-and-so, and they were this old when it happened, and you add that to where it lists in Chronicles and has all of the kings and how long they reigned, it gets you to Christ on the cross in the year 4000. And then you have 2000 years of grace period. And that's when the church has really grown up during those 2000 years. And then you will have the 6000th year. Right before that, you have to backtrack 7 years because there has to be a tribulation in there. And then after the tribulation period, at the 6000th year, you're going to have 1,000 years of the millennium when Jesus gets to reign. That's the full 7,000. That's the week of years. So Genesis 6:4. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of human, meaning they definitely were not human, who bore children to them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. So again, I go back to these are Zeus and Hercules and Apollo and Diana, who were idolized. And this is part of the reason why God hates idolatry, because back then they were worshiping beings that were fallen angels, and that is so against God because they committed evil. They decided to come down here and be with evil instead of being in their heavenly estate, which it says in Enoch. They left their heavenly estate, and so God condemned them. Okay, so it says that when God decided to wipe out all the earth for the evil, he decided to start over with Noah, who was perfect in his generations. What he's saying here is that Noah had not been tainted. He was not, any combination of DNA that had come from the evil ones that had come down. He was perfect in his generations. So perfect genes. Okay, then I wanted to have you investigate, or sometimes read if you can, the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, Part 1 and 2 by Gary Wayne. He talks about how not all the giants were wiped out, even though Israel did go in war against like Anak and his group. And, that's another thing. When these Pleiadians talk about Anunnaki and say they were 200,000 years ago, no, because Anak, who was their leader, is in the Bible, and they fought against him and won. So, further proof for those who don't want to believe. Next, The Power in the Game, another book. This one's by William Guy Carr. What this shows is the giants considered themselves royalty because they were in heaven. They called themselves the kings, the queens, the princes. And so they followed their lineage. Now they couldn't, how do I want to say this? The fallen ones had to mate with women because they cannot procreate together. And so that meant the giants had to try to keep inbreeding as much as they could to keep their lineage clean, lineage pure. These people that were in Europe, the kings, the queens, the princes, the Hungarians, the Germans, the Queen of England, the King of England, the King of France, all of them trace their roots back. They formed Freemasonry because it went back to Babylon. They had that going all the way in the background since back then. They're proud of their lineage. They try to keep it. And so for many hundreds of years, they would fight the royals over who is the king of Jerusalem, because they're trying to take the place of Jesus. So if you read through these books, you can see how many times they kind of fought each other in fighting between the different groups of giants, because they wanted to be the king of Jerusalem. And different people had that titles through like a 200-year span or more. So the whole thing flows through, and they're here today. Yes, the royal family of England. They kind of survived it because when others like in France got wiped out, many have survived. It's just that they went underground for Freemasonry, and they built up vast storages of money because they were behind every war. World War I, World War II, the war to overcome France, the war to overcome Russia, the war, every single war, they raised immense amounts of wealth, which is why years ago at one of these conventions that had to be about green, and King Charles made a speech, and he said, he, meaning the Antichrist, has trillions at his disposal to fix the world. So there we have it. Okay, so I want to teach a little bit of words here. Antediluvian means before the flood. Post-diluvian means after the flood. So Genesis 6:2. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took as wives whomever they chose. And the word for them, the sons of God, is Benai Elohim. I know there's a guy out there, and I'm not going to name names, and he's spreading false information because he's bought into, even though he's a Christian, he's bought into this idea of and that they're aliens. But it's clear that this term, Benai Elohim, is angels. Okay? And we have proof of who they were in the book of Enoch. Talks about the fallen angels. Baruch has it. Also, in this book of the giants, we're going to go into that. So all these things confirm each other, and in the Bible when it talks about the Benai Elohim. Okay, so here's 5 reasons for fallen angels. At some point, they inquire of Enoch. They go up to heaven because Enoch was raptured up. He's the first example of a rapture. So there's always like an archetype of what's going to happen in the past, like it says in Ecclesiastic, what happened before will happen again. That's one of those things where in the book of Enoch, they want to inquire of God if they could return to heaven, because they made a pact, and I can't remember the name of the leader of the angels that decided to descend here. We're not talking, even though the devil fell, etc. We're talking the angels who had made a pact. Now, pacts are binding, just like the 10 Commandments were in the Old Testament back in that time before Jesus did a lot of freeing of everything. But how do I want to say this? The 10 Commandments are good, but we don't do it by works now because his blood covers us. So that's long story short. So, but a pact like that is binding. So all the angels agreed together to have a pact that they would all go down, because they thought, well, what if some of us back out and stuff? And no, they all decided to come down here, the ones that came. And so later on, they want to go back to heaven, and they're thinking, oh, what have we done? We miss heaven, etc. Heaven is heaven. And so they decide to inquire of Enoch. Ask God if we can come back. And God said, no, you left your first estate. Yep. Okay. In the book of Giants, this is a book that's found in Qumran, along with the other Dead Sea Scrolls, etc., which we know are true because, interesting, when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found scrolls of Isaiah. And when they translated these old scrolls, exactly the same verbiage we have today for Isaiah in our Bibles, in my current Bible. So there is the book of the Giants, and in the book of the Giants, they talk about Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, the whole story of Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, true. True, true, true. They were giants. Gilgamesh was a giant. And we'll get into even more of why our government was interested in Gilgamesh. But Gilgamesh confirms the Book of the Giants because Mugway talks to Gilgamesh and other giants, and they're all like, oh, God said he's going to flood the earth, and Noah's getting ready with an ark, and, so they knew what God was planning a big deal. God was planning a flood. They knew. And so the giants and Gilgamesh asked Mugway in the Book of Giants to go up to Enoch in heaven and ask Enoch to ask God, is he going to destroy us? So Mugway goes shooting through the universe and up to heaven. way. He goes up to heaven to ask Enoch, and he asks Enoch, and Enoch said, okay, I'll inquire. And so he goes and asks God, and God again says, you left your first estate. Yes, the flood's going to wipe out all the sinful. And so, Mugway's pretty discouraged. He comes back down to earth to tell his giant friends, and he says, God is going to wipe us out. End of story on that one. And he did. Okay, so, and also Baruch 2 confirms these events. So these beings were Nephilim because they're in antediluvial times, and Raphaim were post-diluvial times. I don't know, and it's a big mystery, and some people have conjectured and everything. I'm not even going to go there. I don't know how there were giants before, and then there were giants again later. Don't know, somehow they survived it underground, or I have no idea. But they were back again after the flood, which is why David slew Goliath, who was of the line of giants. And and it's kind of inferred in the Bible that maybe they'll be back again. And why? Here's why. Because it says in Matthew 24:37, as it was in the days of Noah, so will it be in the second coming of the Son of Man. I think they may be in the tribulation, the giants. I don't have proof of that because, it doesn't say specifically in tribulation about the giants, but it talks about some horrific things, believe me. Yes, things with stingers and people wish to die but can't, so there's something about how they can't die, and maybe it's because of the mark of the beast. However, it says there in Matthew 24:37, it just kind of talks to a normalcy. It says people were, at the time that the tribulation starts, they were giving and being given in marriage. They were feasting, living life as normal, and and there were these beings in the land, these giants. So I'm just thinking, well, if it's going to really be like that, then maybe they're going to be back here for some reason. I don't know that for a fact, so keep that in mind. In Matthew 24:3, the disciples asked Jesus, when will these things come to happen? And what is the sign of your coming, the second coming, and the end of the world? The number one thing he says is a warning for our time. Take care that no one deceives you, because many will come using my name and saying I am the Christ, and they will deceive many. He goes on to say at the end there will be wars and rumors of wars, earthquakes in diverse places, plagues and famines. Christians will be persecuted. There will be a falling away of the church. Men will betray one another. Many false prophets will arise and deceive many. And there'll be an increase of lawlessness. Love in most men will grow cold. But the man who stands firm to the end will be saved. And the gospel will be proclaimed to the whole earth, and then the end will come. So the last thing to happen, because all these other things have been happening in spades, and not just in before, when people claimed, we're, like the year 2000 and the year 2010, when they said, so many Christians were saying we're there for the rapture. It couldn't be true then, because these things that Jesus is describing are global catastrophes. They're global fires, they're global earthquakes, they're global plagues like we had in 2019. In Mark 13:24, it says the same thing, but he also adds, after that time of distress, the sun will be darkened, the moon will lose its brightness, the stars will come falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds in great power and glory. Yes, he will. Because when he died on the cross, he said, it's finished. He did the work. He walked out 33 perfect years. I personally believe, even though it doesn't say this in the Bible, I believe that Jesus walked out the exact time between when Adam was in right standing, but then when he ate of the fruit, etc., and was fallen. So he completed for what the first Adam lacked in. Thank you, Jesus. Because sin came into the world. Sin has tainted everything. Plants, animals, people, the whole earth groans for his return, for renewal of Jesus. It says that in the Bible, so just saying. Okay. So in Luke 21:8, they say the same things, but they add, there will be fearful signs and great signs from heaven. He includes for the believer that for Christians, your endurance will win you your lives. Yeah, we have to endure to the end. Jesus said to stand. He said it 3 times, stand, stand, stand in the hour that is upon you. Yeah, we have to stand and we have to share his word. Okay. I'm going to ask you to please read Romans because it explains salvation, because time is running out. It's really important to read Romans. This is an exciting time for believers because the rapture is upon us. We take, again, that 7,000 year period, and you got to backtrack to 6,000, then you got to subtract out the tribulation time. And now that we know that the Lord was on the cross in the year 4000, we know that, hey, that means that he should be returning at the end of the tribulation. He'll come back. We'll be coming back with him on white horses, but we get raptured before, because it's not a snack lunch. We're not going up and coming right back down at the same day, same time. No. There's if you take the 7 days for the 7,000 years and all of that, if you take the, what is the Galilean wedding, Jesus gave this examples to his disciples. They understood when he talked about the wedding and what the covenant meant of the wedding and the blood and everything and the wine that was part of the ceremony when you became engaged, and the contract with him, his body broken and the blood. It's the same as the marriage ceremony, where they make a covenant together and they drink over it with the wine. And then the bride is supposed to go away to her place and prepare for the wedding. And the groom goes to the Father's house, which is heaven, to prepare a place to add on to his home for their home. Exactly what Jesus said when he said, in my house are many mansions. And he was referring to when he would take them unto himself, so that where I am, you will be also. He's talking about when we get raptured and we go home. And in that ceremony, the girl, or the bride, is getting ready. She has everything ready. She doesn't know the hour of her groom's coming to get her. When the Father, which is Abba Father, when Father God says, okay, go get your bride, and the room's ready and everything like that for the feast, the groom comes to her house with his groomsmen. They whisk her up on a litter. It's one of those things, the poles, and there's 4 men, and she's on top. She's raptured up, and they run with her to where the wedding ceremony is, and they shut the door, and they're in there for 7 days celebrating. So while the tribulation is happening down here, we'll be celebrating with the Lord up there, but we will be coming back on horses with the Lord in the air at the end. Okay, so when you are in the Word, I really encourage you, if you are new to Christianity, go read Romans, because it describes salvation, and also 1 Corinthians 15. It talks about how we are saved. There's nothing I can do as a Christian to win my salvation. It was totally done for me when Jesus covered me with his blood. And it's the most precious thing I can tell you about, okay? When he covered me with his blood, it was because he took every single whipping lash of 40 lashes, and as the Bible says in Isaiah, he was unrecognizable as who he was before. He was so scourged. And every one of those stripes, it says, by his stripes we're healed. And I believe that. And I've seen miraculous healings, and people at my church, and even somebody I minister in the woods who had diabetes due to taking drugs, and she got completely healed. She no longer had to take a bus down to Seattle to get her dialysis. And, you know, she's still praising God to this day, a year later. So happy, thank you, Jesus, for that. But anyway, his stripes heal us. So further on salvation, you admit you're a sinner. Because why? What happens if you sin and there's no remission of sin? You've never paid for it, you've never done your jail time, you know, etc. The wages of sin are death, what it says in the Bible. Nobody is good enough. Nobody's at God's standard. I'm sorry. You sin one little thing, you know, and we all have, because we're living in a fallen world. And so God is so good. He found the only way was to send his only son. I can't imagine ever sending my daughter to do something like this. I couldn't do it. But he did. And his son came down here and lived a perfect life for 33 years and went to the cross. And when he went down, he was down there for 2 days, comes up on the third day, yay, came up out of the tomb. Nobody could find him because he was gone. Except for he did come back. He was seen by 5,000 at one point, which is one of the reasons why I can't remember this guy's name, but he's written some books about Jesus, and he used to be an atheist. He almost left his wife because she was a Christian and he couldn't stand it. But then he was a researcher. He started investigating the Bible. I think what really convinced him was Jesus was struck with a sword in his side to make sure he was dead. And what would come out would be water and blood. Water, because when you're hanging on the cross, eventually you drown to death and your lungs go. So it was forensic proof that Jesus did die. And then he did come back. He was seen by the 5,000 and then by his closest, his disciples, etc. Cephas and others, it says. So he did this so that all we would have to do is let him in our hearts and say, please forgive me my sins. Everybody has sinned, no matter how good they say they are, including me. Absolutely. And God has taken all of that for me. And there's nothing I can do to earn my salvation. All I can do is believe it and have faith in him. And that's, B is for believe, and C is commit. Go get baptized. Commit your life to the Lord. Find a good church. Stay in the Word. The Word is oil in your body. What I mean by that is when it talks about oil in the Bible, it's talking about the Holy Spirit. There's a story about 10 virgins. 10 of them have their oil ready, and the groom is going to come to take them away. Here we go. It's a rapture story. So the groom is going to come take them away. And there's 10 virgins there who do not have their oil ready. And they say to the other virgins, oh, could we use some of your oil? And they said, no, because, it's because the oil was what they did for their closeness with God. It can't be given to somebody else because each person has to have that intimacy with God themselves, God, with Jesus, the closeness with Jesus. And he's so real. I have physically heard his voice twice. And I'm nobody that he should do this for me. Not at all. He just did because he's that good. He's that good. So I'm going to encourage you, be in Romans, and also know what it says about the devil in the Bible. Now, the fallen ones, they claim that the devil is actually the shining star. They steal the name that is given to Jesus in the Bible, the shining star, and they give it to the devil. And the devil in Freemasonry, they say that the devil came down here to free people so you could do whatever you want. Do what thou wilt is a saying in Freemasonry. Do you really think that if you go do all kinds of heinous things, it's all going to work out well for you? I'm sorry. There's a hell. It wasn't created for you and me. It was created for the fallen ones. But if you reject such a hard-won battle that Jesus did to save us all, and all you had to do was say yes to him, that's really sad. He went the extra mile and then some to save us. And he gave up his life in the most horrific way. He knew how painful it was going to be. And here, think about this. He's fully God, but he has to set that aside to do in the human what we can't do, be perfect. And when he was at that Garden of Gethsemane, right before they're going to haul him off, he's sweating blood. It's so horrific, and he knows. And he knew probably from the time he was little all the way up what he was going to be doing. Imagine, I don't want to know when I'm going to die and how it's going to be. Don't want to know. Because you know what? Horrible. And yet he did that all for us. So anyway, here's the thing that it says about the devil in the Bible. He's a liar. He comes to kill, steal, and destroy. He makes people malign each other. He gives half-truths many times so that it can pass. And that's what was in this story of the Pleiadians on the website. Half-truths and then lies mattered in like 200,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. Lying about Jesus and calling him J-sauce. Okay? So, again, from the Pleiadian thing, timeline's wrong. The Bible comports with Enoch and the Book of Giants and the Gilgamesh story. There is proof of Gilgamesh, by the way. In 2003, an archaeologist from Germany, George, S-J-O-R-G, Fassbinder, was in Iraq and discovered Gilgamesh's tomb. He discovered a being in there from old that's like 17 feet long. Okay, and so he's there and he's doing his excavating and comparing to things that are in the museum in Iraq that have information about Gilgamesh from cuneiform. And what happened was, interestingly, our government found out about it, our DOD, Department of Defense. And 6 months later, our U.S. military went in and took the body and took the cuneiform tablets were there. They claimed there were weapons of mass destruction. Remember? Never found any? Real reason to be there? Get Gilgamesh's body. And they raided the museum in Iraq that had these cuneiform and little tablets that talked about, Gilgamesh and all of that. And they wanted the information, so they took it all. To date, they have not returned all, but they did return some to the museum. All this is verified by a man named Michael Lake, who called, and he had a student who was in the military who called him on a satellite phone to share what was taking place in Iraq. He was there at the time when they were taking this stuff. And he said, yeah, we found no weapons of mass destruction. It was all about Gilgamesh and whatever information they could find about him. And I have conjecture about that. I'll say, based on the Bible, I would say they want to use Gilgamesh DNA for transhumanistic purposes, and possibly to alter our DNA by putting some of the mark of the beast. It might be something that they use in there for whatever reason. Revelation 13, 16 to 18. The Antichrist forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their foreheads, so that no one could buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. Revelation 18:23. With your pharmakeia is where we get our word pharmacy. You deceived all the peoples of the world. I'm going to say this is what happened in 2019 with the COVID that did come from China, that did come from gain of function research, etc. And it's interesting. J.D. Farag, if you ever get a chance to watch jdfarag.org, watch his videos where he gives a prophetic update every week. I haven't watched mine yet this week. I'm so excited to watch it because he knows all of this. He knows all about what's been happening. He knows about the cloud seeding. He knows about the fires in Lahaina, and also in this place, well, in California. There's also somewhere in South America on a coastline where a city had the same thing happen. All three of those cities were designated as 15-minute cities. So just a little background there. What I want to say about this pharmakeia is that the world got united through the World Economic Forum, and then also that governing body for healthcare that they set up. And that body is going to have carte blanche later if we get another plague. They're going to be in charge. And what's interesting about this is in Hawaii, J.D. Farag wrote letters for people that they could submit for religious exemption. And he involved an attorney, and they did over like 100,000 of them for people that were in medicine who didn't want to lose their jobs because they didn't want the shot, or people that were in the military. Many people use these. And then Hawaii just recently tried to pass a law so that you wouldn't be able to have any exemption, that every single person in the state of Hawaii would have to get the shot. Forced to. Yeah. I think there was one like that also, and I don't know if it got passed in Washington State or not, because that's where I live. But I know what they're planning to do, because that whole thing was a dry run for how much control you can have over people. The masking, you can't go there, and church was closed for a while, and all of it had to do with that. It's control in the end times. Yep. Okay. Galatians 5:19. When self-indulgence is at work, the results are obvious. Fornication, indecency, sexual irresponsibility, idolatry, pharmakeia, sorcery, meaning feuds and wranglings, jealousy, bad tempers, disagreements, factions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and similar things. I warn you now, those who behave like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. I know many people I've heard online and elsewhere that just assume everybody's going to go to heaven. How is a most holy God who in the Old Testament, when Ezekiel was taken to see God, he said, "Woe is me, I am so sinful." And here he was a righteous man pretty much, but he's human. So God had a coal put in his mouth that purified him and his body. That's how holy God is. Fall on your knees, because, he's as far from us, as it says in the Old Testament, as the stars are in heaven from us. So please, 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 I'm begging you, get to know him now before it's too late, because Jesus says that there will come a time. He said, work while it is day. He's talking to me as an evangelist. Go work, bring them in while it is day, because when night comes, night will come when no one can work. That's when he's made his decision. That's when their goats are separated from the sheep. I'm just a little sheep. I'm a sheep. Okay. So he talks about all these things that those people are not going to inherit the kingdom of God. What the Holy Spirit brings is very different. It's so true. When you have the Lord, you get love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trustworthiness, in some versions, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. We know as Christians that we're not to take offense at anybody. If we have this relationship with God, there is no one we should take offense with. You know? Nobody. Okay. So last, I just want to encourage that you read Daniel and Revelation are the same. If you read those and you understand what they mean, they both are saying the same things about this end time period. People you can watch to learn a lot. CJ Lovick online, who has a Rock Island Books site, he has done a lot of deep research on the end times that we're in now. So I highly recommend you go watch CJ Lovick. 2 Peter 3:8-9. But do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. He says he will tarry. Now here's what I think about that. Back in 2017, I started having a whole lot visions and dreams. I always knew that God told me things because he would tell me things through my life. They were few and far between, but they would come true. And it's a prophetic gift, and thank you very much, Lord, for that. I mean, sometimes it was hard because sometimes it was people passing and then they did, like shortly after. But nonetheless, in 2017, things intensified beyond belief. I had so many dreams that showed the end times, and back when I was young, I'd had a dream about the rapture. At that time, I knew it was way off in the distance. Since 2017, I've had a good number, 5, 6, somewhere in there of rapture dreams that made me know that it was any time now. 2017 was significant because that was the year that God put in the heavens a sign, the Revelation 12 sign. You can go look at Revelation 12, the woman with the stars around her head. Stars represent, there were 12, they represent the tribes of Judah. And so that sign was meant for, and I misunderstood that sign at the time it happened, so I thought things would happen quicker than they have. My misunderstanding, not God's. He was communicating to me. I don't always understand what he's saying. So when he had that in the sky, it was for the Jews to tell them that their tribulation is coming, okay? So 2017. So this kind of follows along the story of Joseph. If you look up the story of Joseph, he had many hardships in the beginning. He was in jail and everything in Egypt, even though he was hauled away there. His brothers had betrayed him. But because God shared some dreams of Pharaoh's with Joseph, he ended up being put in charge because he interpreted Pharaoh's dream. He was put in charge because there were 2 dreams that Pharaoh had. One had to do with the 7 years of plenty, which he didn't know what it meant because it was 7 good cows and 7 nice fat wheat shafts. And then in the other part, there was 7, skinny cows that were emaciated and 7, dried up shriveled wheat things or whatever. So Joseph understood the dream that there would be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of tribulation, of plague, of, famine. Now, that is a perfect example of that we're going to have a rapture because Joseph marries a Gentile wife, which represents the Gentile bride, if you think about it. He married her before the tribulation. Yep. And because of what he did, there was deliverance for the 7 years of the famine. So there's that. Okay. So coming down to Genesis 1:14-19, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs, for seasons, for days and years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. Okay? And it was so. Now, the first thing he says there isn't, oh, it's because there's going to be, you're going to count months by this and you're going to count years by this and all that. No, he said it was signs. just like the sign of this special star of Bethlehem that was right there the day that Jesus was born. The star for the Jews was there in 2017. So what happens if you go from 2017? So 2024, a lot of people thought that would be the year that the tribulation would start. We'd be raptured right before that. But there is a scripture that says, though I tarry, I will not tarry. What does this mean? What I think it means is that he is going to tarry, but the problem that we have is between the original Jewish God's calendar. It really wasn't Jewish. He explained to them how you will calculate, which was 360 days in a year, not 365. So there's like this whole thing of the real calendar that's God calendar and our Gregorian calendar. Okay, so I can't know, because the seasons also are different. They run differently from which month things start is not January, okay? And then it goes through a year and it doesn't follow with ours. So because of that, we can't know the day or the hour. There's no way. It's just not possible. I haven't found a way. And lots of people have tried, believe me. Barry Awe, this group called the Watchmen Online, just so many, Watchmen, whoever. There are so many of these folks that are kind of in the prophetic, but, we just, there's no way we're going to pin it down. God said so. Yeah. And if he said so, that's the truth. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I do know we're in the tarrying period now. And what we're waiting for is that last Gentile that's going to say yes to Jesus. And then it's like that, like a twinkling of an eye. We're out of here. So please, I'm just going to pray over you all. Lord, bless them and keep them. Make your face to shine upon them. Give them your countenance of blessings. Give them your peace, peace that surpasses all understanding. Any demonic out there, break it off. The people who hears this, bless them and anoint them with your oil. Give them the oil of intimacy with you. Turn people's hearts to you and take the veil off their eyes, like you talk about. Take the veil off their eyes that they can see you, Lord, especially now. In Jesus' precious name, and I like to call him by what he really went by. Thank you, blessed Yeshua HaMashiach. So bless you all. Thank you for listening. And I hope I helped someone out there. And I'll tell you, if even one gets saved, it was worth it. Okay. I feel that way about what he did on the cross, by the way. I feel if I was the only one, he would have done it for me. Okay. Take care. Love you. Bye.